encapsulate the Black experience in Milwaukee in a 45-minute PowerPoint. This presentation is the first in a series to be presented by the Milwaukee County Historical Society in January and February. Today, I would like to talk about the first 125 years of African American presence in Milwaukee.
Anyway, I've seen it, and they're pretty high. But when the inspector came on Monday, I mentioned it to him and he said, "Oh yeah," he said that
somebody has their sound turned on. Will you please turn it off?
The host should be able to mute that person.
All right, I'll continue. Dr. Michael Bonds,
Sorry. Ignore that.
All right. I relied heavily on Dr. Michael Bond's book, Early Black Milwaukee, 1830 to 1920. It was very helpful in putting this PowerPoint together, and I would recommend it if you want to get a little detailed information. As Dr. Michael Bonds notes, Blacks resided in Wisconsin and southeastern Wisconsin as early as the 1700s. Blacks first arrived in small numbers in the 18th century during the era of exploration and fur trade, serving as guides, trappers, interpreters, and boatmen for French voyagers. In addition, enslaved Blacks accompanied English and French soldiers and traders. Joe Oliver, cook hired by Solomon Juneau in 1835, is often cited as the city's first Black resident. Oliver holds the distinction of becoming the first Black resident to vote in the state of Wisconsin, casting a vote in the town's first election in 1835. Only white males were typically allowed suffrage, but territorial conditions before statehood often were flexible and fluid. As John Gerda notes that local authorities invited all the actual settlers to vote. Black vote in Milwaukee would not be cast for 30 years after the Civil War and after legal challenge. By 1850, a small Black community of about 100 people lived in Milwaukee. Most were free Blacks or former slaves, purchased their freedom, but some were escaped enslaved people. Living with the ever-present fear of being recaptured under the Fugitive Slave Act and brought back south. These early residents often worked as artisans, barbers, cooks, waiters, store owners, clerks, and skilled tradespeople. The small community became a site for those looking to rebuild after seeking freedom. Many owned property and joined a middle class. Here's one example of an early Black entrepreneur, Jonathan Myers Freeman, originally from Pennsylvania, set up shop in Milwaukee, and according to the 1960 census, he was worth $5,050. Freeing slavery in Missouri in 1852, Joshua Glover made his way north to Racine, Wisconsin, living as a fugitive slave for 2 years in the community. Glover found work at the Sinclair and Rice sawmill and lived in a cabin on the outskirts of Racine. His former master, Benemy Stone Garland, tracked him down and along with local law enforcement recaptured him. Fearing that local abolitionists in Racine would attempt to jailbreak Glover, Garland took Glover to be held in Milwaukee. Sherman Booth, the editor of the Free Democrat, an abolitionist newspaper, organized a delegation of 100 people to ensure Glover received a fair trial. On March 11th, 1854, the crowd swelled to nearly 5,000 people. And after alleged incitement by Sherman Booth, a group of men used axes and a makeshift battering ram to break into the jail and free Glover. Glover was first taken to a safe house in Waukesha, from there on to Canada, where he lived as a free man. It's interesting to note that at that time, Waukesha was a hotbed of abolitionist activity. For those interested in learning more about Joshua Glover, Finding Freedom by Ruby West Jackson and Walter T. McDonald, and The Rescue of Joshua Glover by H. Robert Baker are good resources. An excellent example of life for an early Milwaukee Black family is the Watson family. Born into slavery in Virginia, Sully Watson purchased his freedom in 1827 and moved north with his freeborn wife, Susanna. The pair settled in Ohio, working as a whitewasher and then establishing himself as a stonecutter. When Watson's in-laws found work in Milwaukee, the family moved to follow them. Son William Thomas Watson was also a stonemaker who helped build parts of the Soldiers' Home and the Second County Courthouse. In the 1850s, he spoke at a rally opposing the Fugitive Slave Act, warning that the act threatened the entire Black community, as both escaped slaves and free Blacks could be trafficked into slavery, given that most catchers did not care who they kidnapped. Watson's comments at the meeting of colored citizens were summarized by the Milwaukee Sentinel. I quote, "Our liability to be arrested at any moment and taken we know not where, before we know not whom, and adjudged before any slavish commissioner or judge whose fiat would be omnipotent in deciding us to be chattel property belonging to any claimant who would commit perjury in swearing to men, women, or persons they never saw. In all the bearings of law, we see no hope, no ray of light except in self-protection, which is the law of heaven." Unquote. William Thomas Watson became one of the first of 6 Black men to vote in Wisconsin after 1866, and one of his descendants, Mabel Watson Ramey, would go on to be the first Black woman lawyer in Wisconsin. We will discuss Mabel Watson Ramey more in our next installment. On the evening of September 6, 1861, 2 Black men in their 20s named James P. Shelton and George Marshall Clark walked on Milwaukee Street, just south of the corner at Michigan Street. After moving from Virginia to Milwaukee in 1857, Shelton worked as a carpenter and waiter in a confectionery shop. Clark worked as a barber in the city, following in his father's footsteps. The pair, if not friends, likely knew each other as they lived at the same residence at 3rd Street and Cedar, which is now the intersection of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, West Kilburn Avenue. On their walk, they ran into 2 Irishmen named Darby Carney and John Brady, who reacted hostily towards their presence and made racist remarks. The 4 men then got into a verbal altercation that turned violent. In the melee, Shelton slashed Carney in the abdomen, which proved to be a fatal wound. Carney died the next day after naming Shelton as the man who stabbed him. Brady suffered a shoulder wound in the altercation. It is important to note that Carney had a long criminal record, being arrested 5 times for assault throughout the 1850s, one involving a firearm. So it is plausible he escalated the altercation into violence. Jurors certainly thought so, given that Shelton was later acquitted of murder on the grounds of self-defense. So what we see here on the left is actual documents from Shelton's court case, which we have at the Milwaukee County Historical Society. Right photograph is a outline of the movements during the lynching. After the fight, Shelton and Clark evaded police but were caught in jail. A mob of 300 people broke into the jail at 12:30 a.m. and rendered Police Chief William Beck unconscious as he attempted to prevent the mob from attacking the 2 men. Shelton was able to flee in the confusion and escape to the Waukesha area, but Clark was seized and lynched by the mob between Main, now Broadway, and Water Street. Shelton was found September 9th, 1861, and taken back by police to face second-degree murder charges. The jury found Shelton not guilty as the use of the knife had been self-defense. Friends smuggled him out of town because of fears for his safety, despite his vindication in court. Lynching of Clark had a negative impact on Milwaukee, causing many Black families to move out of the area, feeling unsafe. On the left is a document. I'm sorry. While George Marshall Clark's death cast a shadow over the history of Milwaukee, today residents have ensured that he be remembered and will remain a part of the public memory of the city. Journalists, community activists, residents, as well as civic, cultural, and business groups worked together to guarantee that George Marshall Clark's story no longer be overlooked or forgotten. At the beginning of the Civil War, the Black population numbered about 100 people in Milwaukee and about 1,000 statewide. Some men, like William Thomas Watson, raised money for troops during the Civil War. There were others who joined the military. The 29th Colored Infantry is the only Black unit raised in Wisconsin and played an important role in the Battle of Petersburg in 1864. Most recruits were from Illinois or Missouri and had enlisted to take the place of wealthy men who were drafted into the Union. In the Civil War, wealthy men could hire a substitute for $300, roughly $7,000 today. The Black replacements were inducted into the Army at the place of residence of the man providing the bounty. So that's why people from Illinois and Missouri were actually registered in Wisconsin and sometimes Milwaukee. Jeff Cannell, in his book Make Way for Liberty, notes that there was corruption in the draft beyond the buyout program that favored the rich. Those enlisted as substitutes sometimes were tricked into serving. Robert Graham, Dick Kane, and Will Payne were three Black from Tennessee answered an advertisement to work in a Milwaukee tannery for $40 a month. However, upon their arrival at Milwaukee and after they signed papers the men assumed for employment contracts, the presenter revealed the men had signed contracts to serve for 3 years in the Union Army, and they were sent to fight in Missouri, the 18th Colored Infantry. The post-Civil War era produced Black individuals who were unwilling to accept illegal methods and antebellum attitudes used to suppress their newly fought for rights. Let's start with Ezekiel Gillespie. Born in 1818 into slavery, Ezekiel Gillespie bought his own freedom for $800 and arrived in Milwaukee in 1851, where he opened a grocery store. Facing financial troubles in the Depression of 1857, he took a job as a messenger for the Milwaukee and St. Paul Railway Company. In 1865, he attempted to vote and was turned away. Blacks legally had the right to vote since 1849. However, because more Blacks chose not to vote on the question of suffrage in 1849 and left the ballot blank rather than vote in favor or against, he's incorrectly interpreted those ballots left blank as no votes. In 1866, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that the results of the 1849 election had been misinterpreted and Blacks indeed had gained the right to vote in 1849. John Jordan Hill was a veteran of the 32nd U.S. Colored Infantry and was wounded twice, once during the Battle of Honey Hill in 1864 and again in South Carolina in 1865. Arriving in Milwaukee in the early 1870s, by 1876 he became the head waiter of the Plankinton House Hotel. The hotel, in fact, became the largest Black employer in the city at the time. Miles became a respected civic leader offering jobs to emancipated slaves, summer jobs to Black college students, and jobs for fellow veterans. Eventually, he owned a grocery store and property worth $15,000. John Jordan Miles was also the only Black member of the Grand Army of the Republic Veterans Group in Milwaukee. He was later denied service at a local restaurant, the Schlitz Palm Garden. Miles brought the first challenge to enforce the Civil Rights Bill. Technically, and although he technically won the case, the establishment was only charged $5 as a penalty. On September 12th, 1889, a Black railroad worker named Owen Howell attempted to see a play at the white-owned Bijou Opera House on 2nd Street, just south of what is now Wisconsin Avenue. When Howell attempted to take his seat on the main floor, an usher hurried over and directed him to sit in the balcony, an area relegated to Black customers. Rather than accepting the indignity, Howell filed a lawsuit against the owner for discrimination, with strong encouragement from William T. Green, the first Black law student to enroll at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. In 1890, Milwaukee Circuit Court Judge Daniel H. Johnson that Howell had been discriminated against, and he awarded the plaintiff $100 in damages and $51.85 in costs. The case and the ruling galvanized the Milwaukee Black community into creating a Union League of Wisconsin to fight discrimination. While still a law student at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, William T. Green became the force for pushing for civil rights legislation in Wisconsin. He was the first Black graduate of the UW in 1892. While still a law student, he authored the 1895 Civil Rights Bill outlawing discrimination in public places. It failed to pass each legislative session until Republicans regained the Assembly and Legislature in 1895. After the Howell case, he chided the National and local African American League for being too slow to combat discrimination. Publishing a letter in May of 1890 in the Detroit Plain Dealer, Green asked for support, but also criticized national leaders for their indifference. He laid out the conditions for Blacks in the state and asked them to push harder for changes. Quote, African Americans are frozen out of every legitimate employment save the most menial, unquote. And African Americans are being driven to the gallery of a theater like dogs in a woodshed, unquote. He urged the members of the National League to, quote, unite, organize, and in unity devise some means to do away with these absurdities, unquote. After the bill's passage, he became a lawyer, opening a practice in 1883 in Milwaukee and defended civil, criminal, and discrimination cases till his death in 1911. Interestingly, he also founded an integrated social club in Milwaukee, which was a radical move given the prevailing racist eugenics theories of the time. Isaac T. Bryan successfully challenged on an appeal from a lower court decision a refusal of service at a Milwaukee restaurant. It was one of the first tests of Wisconsin's Civil Rights Act, 1895. In 1895, the Black population was about 800 people, with 60,000 in business investments and 25,000 in church and lodge property. According to a 1900 United States Census, occupations for Black Milwaukeeans listed 19 men and 4 women as business owners. According to historian Joe Trotter, most Black business owners were barbers, saloon keepers, rooming house operators, dressmakers, and seamstresses. By 1910, 26 men and 14 Black women were listed as business owners in the era. Let's first look at Black churches. And for the first and probably best known congregation was St. Mark African Methodist Episcopal Church, located at 4th and Cedar, which is now Kilbourne, and was located there from 1887 to 1914. Moving to 1525 North 4th Street from 1914 to 1953. The congregation is currently located at 1641 West Atkinson. Other congregations included Calvary Baptist, founded in 1895, Greater Galilee and Mount Zion Baptist, both in 1919. And by the late 20s, there were more than a dozen African-American preachers, including Earl Little, whose son, Malcolm, would later change his last name to X and change the course of the civil rights movement. St. Benedict de Moore, by Captain Lincoln C. Valley in 1908, and was administered by the Roman Catholic Capuchin Order from 1911 on. Famous alum include jazz-era great Lionel Hampton, Mayor Harold Washington of Chicago, comedian Red Fox, and Olympic track star Ralph Metcalf. St. Ben's offered a unique boarding school experience for male and female African Americans. However, the boarding school closed in 1954. The high school was forced to close in 1967, another Black institution impacted by expressway construction. And we will revisit Black churches in more detail in our next installment. The Wisconsin Weekly Advocate emerged as Milwaukee's first Black newspaper in 1898, headed by former slave Richard B. Montgomery and linked to the Colored Helping Hand Intelligence Office. Its readership consisted largely of Southern Blacks interested in coming north to Wisconsin. The paper is most noted for hiring Lillian Maxey, Wisconsin's first Black journalist. Atlanta University graduate J. Anthony Josie started the Wisconsin Weekly Blade in 1916. In 1925, the paper merged with the Wisconsin Enterprise, rebranded itself as the Wisconsin Enterprise Blade, and was published into the 1940s. The Great Migration was a mass exodus from the South, due in part both to racial terror in the South and economic opportunity in the North. This picture is from the Alice Chalmers Corporation, and it's of a 20-year-old woman named Annie Tabor. More than likely, this is work done during World War II. The photo was unfortunately undated. Here are some statistics. In 1920, Milwaukee's Black population was 2,000. By 1930, that population reached 7,000. And by 1945, 10,000 Black Americans were residents in Milwaukee County. Let's look at some of the personalities and places that defined this era. And before I move on, there are two books that cover the working class aspect of this period, and I would recommend them. The Jones family, John and Etta, is one example of a successful Great Migration story. Born in Lexington, Virginia, World War I veteran John W. Jack Jones moved to Milwaukee in the 1920s. He worked as a porter for the Chicago North Shore and Milwaukee Railroad, and by 1930 was the manager of OK Dental Laboratory. He later had his own business, Jones Dental Laboratory, that manufactured dentures and other dental equipment. Born in Memphis, Etta Jones was a career soloist who was involved with local musical productions, recitals, and was very active in the St. Mark AME Church Chorus. She was also very involved with the Milwaukee Urban League and the National Association of Colored Women, and is shown here in a 1926 photo as the Milwaukee delegate to the state convention for the Wisconsin State Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. Bernice Copeland was the first African American to graduate from Ohio State University. Moving to Milwaukee in 1928, she became the executive director of Northside Young Women's Christian Association. Despite having a huge offering, popular programs and support for Black women, the YWCA Board of Directors refused to invest in a permanent YWCA location on the north side. Plagued by pay inequity, the organization's policy of segregation in its downtown dormitory, and a realization that Black workers were blocked from advancement by institutional racism, she and the entire staff resigned in protest over the lack of funding and poor working conditions. Lindsay noted in a report to the board of directors that the YMCA's commitment to inclusion did not extend to their Black employees. In her efforts to bring about better race relations, Lindsay helped organize the Mary Terrell Club in 1933 and was an original member of the Milwaukee Commission on Human Rights, was formed in 1944. She also served as a member of the Governor's Council on Human Rights. For more insight into workplace inequality in Milwaukee, a recent book by Crystal Moten is a must-read. Chapter 1 talks about the YWCA and is drawn from Copeland Lindsay's reports of conditions center. Brothers Wilbur and Arnie Halyard organized the Columbia Savings and Loan in 1924 and opened for business in 1925. By 1933, many Milwaukeeans, not just African Americans, customers. Here's a shot of their later location, which was at 2000 West Fond du Lac Avenue, very close to the old Steers and Roebuck that was there. First serving Eastern European immigrants, the 4th Street Social Center became the locus for African American education and recreational activities. An example of an adult night class. Here are a series of photographs capturing Milwaukee's Black community from 1940 to 1960. This is a view of Bronzeville at 1420 North 6th Street in 1948. Milwaukee's Black population steadily increased, reaching 10,200 by 1945, as I said, and 20,772 by 1950, and 60,500 by 1960. This is an example of some of the activity that was going on at the 4th Street Social Center. So the idea was, while it was a school during the day, in the evening and after school hours, it would engage youth and adults in various activities. This is a photograph of a team, the Rainbow Five, and they were the 1939 intramural basketball team champions. Another example would be tournaments and games that would be provided for kids. These are game room tournament winners, and some of their names are written on this, which is especially helpful for genealogists. Here we have a picture of John W. Jones on the right in front of St. Mark AME Church. This is a Labor Temple Hall, 8th and Wall. This is also a Jones family photo. They are somewhere in there. It's kind of hard. Maybe the next time I'll need to point those out. And this is a photograph that we call a stroll in Bronzeville. I also call it the Ice Cream Girls. We think this is on North 3rd Street, but we aren't sure for certain. It is certainly Bronzeville. Bronzeville encompassed the area between West North Avenue and West State Street as the north-south boundaries, and North 3rd Street and North 12th Street as the east-west boundaries. Walnut Street, the heart of the community, ran parallel to State Street just south of Carver Park. This photograph is taken by Lila, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with his name. It was circa 1955, and it's really what Oberweis did best. He captured people in their natural element, and this is one beautiful example of that. This is the Hillside Public Housing Development in 1950, under construction. This is also a Lyle Oberweis photograph. It was one of the first public housing projects in Milwaukee, started in the late 40s. We'll talk about this much more in our next installment. Here's a picture of Lyle Hampton, another Lyle Overweiss photo from the Riverside Theater in 1949. This performance, as were all Lyle Hampton, celebrated his connection to Bronzeville and to Milwaukee as a graduate of St. Benedict. The following 4 images come from the 1950 to 60 business directories in our African American collection, and are patterned after the Victor Hugo Green's Green Book format. These publications promoted Black businesses and provided travel information for Black Milwaukeeans traveling in still segregated United States. Here are a couple of shots of some restaurants and grocery stores. Stewart's Food later became Lena's Food, which was Lena's Foods, which was very active in Milwaukee until into the 1990s, I believe. One of their locations I remember was the former Pole store on Holton Avenue. Here we have a couple more different businesses. So we have a hi-fi and record center and a service station. Barbershops, of course, which were a very traditional form of employment and business ownership. And interestingly, they would also have clubs in these particular publications. And this is a picture of the Tally Ho Riding Club of Milwaukee. We have a few images from Milwaukee Public Schools. This is the wrestling squad. We believe this to be Riverside High School, which really was one of the most racially integrated of the public high schools prior to World War II, and then after World War II, North Division as well. We're not quite sure, but given other pictures, we believe this to be Riverside High School. The Milwaukee Public Schools Department of Schools and Recreation summer playground activities were something that was a way to get Black children out and playing in the community, meeting new friends, meeting people. It was a really good program. I remember it myself as a child, and we have a great collection of these photos, compliments of Department of Schools and Schools and Recreation. This is another Lyle Weiss photograph of the Lappin Park Pool. This is from circa 1965. We have many photographs of this pool, and it is one of the really very early integrated pools in Milwaukee, in the city of Milwaukee. For further reading, I'd recommend these 2 publications, Voices of Milwaukee Bronzeville by Dr. Sandra E. Jones, and Bronzeville, a Milwaukee Lifestyle, a historical review by Ivory Abina Black. Thank you for your attending and your attention, and I will now attempt to answer questions via chat or or on audio. So take it away, Jolie. Well, will today's session be recorded? All right, excellent. Let me go down further here. Okay, those are the 2 chats I see. Any questions or comments? I realize that this is a rather quick overview, but again, we're going to be doing 2 more installments. The 1960 to 1990 is going to be rather, involved. So that will be a bit of a longer presentation, but there is of course a lot of material to go. Right, we certainly have enough material, to do, three. Excellent. Oh, cool. Uh-oh, no, don't, no, Lindsay's gonna grill me. I think I would just like to make a few comments on some of the materials that I used for this presentation are quite useful. We have the whole James Shelton trial as a small manuscript collection. It's a little difficult to read because it's what's the word I'm looking for? The old type of writing, and I'm having a senior moment right now. Yeah, but no, it's just it's written cursive is the word I'm looking for. Thank you for waiting. So it's a little difficult to read that way, but we also the Alice Chalmers collection really has some very interesting genealogical information in it, because uh, while they were shamed into hiring African Americans during World War II by the NAACP, when they did hire them, they kept meticulous records on them. And although this was rather nefarious at the time, it has actually proved to be a good source of some information on individuals worked there. And our school census records are really quite interesting. And in those we see the school rosters at places like St. Ben's. So we have some very interesting records. We have all the civil Milwaukee Circuit Court cases of discrimination from the 19th century, and those are in the building. So we are a resource for Black kids, but we really want to try to be a better one. No, yeah, yeah. You can call myself or my colleague Michael Barrera. If you go to our website, in the About section, you'll see our emails, and then we just ask that you make an appointment. We are open for research on Monday and then Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 5, and we reserve 2 hour increments, 12, 1 to 3, and 3 to 5. And and so, and please, if you're interested in the records, let us know and we can get you in to take a look at some of our wonderful. Yep, yep. I sure do. My, my pleasure.